Well, good afternoon, since it's clearly afternoon. As you know, the Secretary General met yesterday with Foreign Minister Sandra Llovel of Guatemala. She presented him with a letter informing the United Nations of the government's intention to terminate the agreement establishing the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala within 24 hours. As we said in a statement yesterday, we strongly reject the content of the letter. We have been constructively engaged with the government of Guatemala at various levels over the last 16 months in accordance with Article 12 of the agreement creating the Commission. The mandate of the Commission is set to expire on September 3rd, 2019. Until that date, we expect the government of Guatemala to entirely fulfill its legal obligations under the agreement. The Secretary General expects the government of Guatemala to abide by its international undertakings to ensure the protection of the Commission's personnel, both international and national. The Secretary General recalls the important contribution of the Commission to the fight against impunity in Guatemala. On the Central African Republic, representatives of the African Union, the United Nations, and the region are starting a joint visit to the country today, and they will be there until Thursday. The Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, is part of a high-level delegation, as well as the Commissioner for Peace and Security in the African Union, Ismail Shergi, and the ministers of the Central African region and representatives from the Economic Community of Central African States. The purpose of this joint engagement is to show their sustained support for President Touadéra of the Central African Republic, as well as his government, and to give a new impetus to the peace process under the auspices of the African Initiative for Peace and Reconciliation in the Central African Republic. They will meet with senior government officials and key stakeholders and will be working to reinvigorate and amplify international efforts to secure long-lasting peace in the country through dialogue between the government and armed groups. From Myanmar, the acting resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator for Myanmar, Knut Otsby, is deeply concerned about the situation in northern and central Rakhine State, where an estimated 4,500 people have been displaced so far due to fighting between the Arakan army and Myanmar's security forces. Mr. Otsby was shocked by the reports of attacks on January 4th, regrets the loss of life, and offers his deepest sympathies to the families of the police officers who were killed. The resident and humanitarian coordinator urges all sides to ensure the protection of all civilians and uphold their responsibilities under international humanitarian and human rights law. Mr. Otsby further appeals to all sides to intensify efforts to find a peaceful solution to the situation and to ensure humanitarian access to all people affected by the violence. The United Nations has been in close contact with the Myanmar authorities in recent weeks and has offered to support ongoing efforts to respond to the humanitarian needs of those affected by the violence. And turning to Syria, our humanitarian colleagues remain deeply concerned by ongoing reports of civilian casualties, including many women and children, and large-scale civilian displacement due to ongoing hostilities in the southeastern part of Syria's Deir ez-Zor governorate. Over 7,000 people have reportedly fled the Hajin enclave since the beginning of December. The majority of them are women and children, while an estimated 2,000 people remain in the area. Those leaving the Hajin area have reported a dire situation on the ground, with many civilian casualties, critical shortages of food and medical supplies, and large-scale destruction and damage to civilian infrastructure. Humanitarian access to the affected areas remains severely restricted. We remain extremely concerned for civilians who continue to be trapped in Daesh areas. The United Nations continues to call upon all parties and those with influence over them to ensure freedom of movement and safe passage for civilians and to allow unhindered and sustained humanitarian access to all people in need. The United Nations continues to strongly call on all parties to the conflict to take measures to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian and human rights law. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, today launched its $2 billion kilometers to safety campaign, which calls on all people all over the world to cover the distance traveled by refugees each year. UNHCR traced the journeys of refugees around the world and calculated that collectively people forced to flee travel approximately 2 billion kilometers every year to reach the first point of safety. The campaign encourages people to walk, run, or cycle to achieve a cumulative goal of 2 billion kilometers. These acts, when taken together, acknowledge the resilience and strength of refugees. People can log their distance in their fitness app or on the campaign website, stepwithrefugees.org. The World Health Organization report that the resumption of full operations in response to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, North Kivu province. Operations had been affected by civil unrest in Beni, the epicenter of the epidemic, towards the end of last month. WHO now says that under the government's leadership and in collaboration with partner agencies, the Ebola response has resumed across all locations, but warns that further disruption could have serious consequences and gains could be lost if the area suffers periods of insecurity. The main challenges to the response are the security environment, pockets of mistrust among affected population, and poor infection and prevention and control in many public and private health facilities. Some 625 cases, 577 are confirmed, and 377 deaths have been recorded since the outbreak was declared in August of last year. WHO reports that more than 56,500 people have been vaccinated, while 220 people have recovered. Our colleagues in the Security Council Affairs Branch tell us that the highlights of Security Council reports for 2018 is now out, and it provides an overview of the work the Council has done over the year, and it contains information on the evolving practices of the Security Council related to meetings, agenda, decisions, voting patterns, as well as its subsidiary bodies. Like past editions, the 2018 edition includes some innovations. This year's edition features, for the first time, information on procedural votes and expands to 10 years the scope of analysis of Security Council meetings and decision. The electronic version of the document is also available, and it is an interesting read for all of us who are Security Council geeks. And just wanted to answer a question which I had been asked about reports seen in some Lebanese and Israeli media saying that the Middle East coordinator, Nikolai Mladenov, had been involved in the transfer of Qatari funds to Hamas on Gaza. And I want to tell you that the story is false, and Mr. Mladenov is not involved in any way in this issue. And lastly, on a musical note, for your enjoyment, there will be a concert next week at Carnegie Hall on Tuesday, September 15th. Sorry, it's Tuesday, January 15th at 7:30. The Chamber Music Society of the UN Staff Recreation Council will present a concert in support of the Helen Sawaya Fund, a philanthropy program headquartered at Mount Sinai Hospital, whose mission is to enhance the experience of cancer patients using complementary therapies, including music. And I assume you all know how to get to Carnegie Hall. There you go. Thank you. Go ahead. Practice. Yeah.
1, 2. Thanks, Stéphane. The Kuwaiti government announced that they are willing to host the upcoming Yemen talks in Kuwait. Is there any updates on the date of the upcoming talks? And how do you look at the Yemeni government position that they are not willing to participate in any upcoming talks before full implementation of Stockholm agreements? Thank you.
Look, Mr. Griffiths is scheduled to update the Security Council tomorrow as part of the weekly reporting that the Secretary General has been tasked to do. So he will give you the latest updates, including whatever he has or can announce on the talks. We're always, of course, very pleased at any offer from anyone to host any talks sponsored by the UN. Situation on the ground remains obviously delicate. For the Secretary General's part, he's encouraged that the parties have remained committed to the implementation of the Stockholm Agreement. But there is obviously Mr. Griffith's efforts and the party's efforts underscore collective recognition of the urgency to find a sustainable solution for Hodeidah and to secure that vital humanitarian space that we've often talked about.
Yeah, thank you, Stéphane. Bonne my question is regarding Syria. The area near Aleppo and Hama has been overtaken by Jabhat al-Nusra or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. For a few days now, the fighting has intensified. Do you have any update on that and why there's no news coming from the United Nations?
I don't have any update on Syria beyond what I've already what I've just given you. But if I will ask and see if I can get something.
How about the humanitarian help in this area? Because
I will try to get. I will try to get. I will try to get an update. Let's stay in the region.
Thank you, Stéphane, and Happy New Year. About Syria again, you mentioned Hajin. Is there UN personnel, humanitarian workers, or your partners on the ground near Hajin? Can you give us an update about the humanitarian situation in the northeast Syria now?
I'm not aware of any UN personnel in Hajin area. As far as the north, we obviously remain concerned about the humanitarian situation there, but I'll try to give you a bit more exact numbers. I'll come back to you, James.
Yes, back to Yemen. I know we're going to get an update from the Special Envoy tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., but for our reporting between now and then, can you just update us, particularly those that have been away over the holiday period, how many monitors are now on the ground in Yemen and specifically in Hodeidah? What sort of complement do you have and what work are they doing?
They are continuing to work with the parties in trying to implement the agreement. The ramping up of the staff is continuing, but I do not have exact numbers to share with you.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have a follow-up on Yemen. Does the SG has any comments on the allegation from the coalition that the Houthis violated the agreement reached in Sweden?
As I said, the situation on the ground remains extremely fluid. We understand that all the parties remain committed to the implementation of the Stockholm Agreement. Mr. Griffiths is continuing his discussions. He was in Yemen over the weekend, met with the Ansarallah leadership. I think my understanding is that he's scheduled to meet with President Hadi, if he hasn't already done so today. And we are doing whatever we can to work with the parties through the RCC to ensure that there is full respect of the Stockholm Agreement. What we all have to keep in mind is the need to create this humanitarian space to ensure that humanitarian goods can flow in and out of Yemen.
Thank you. I have two questions, Steph. First, on a follow-up on Guatemala. On his statement, the SG says that he hopes that the Guatemalan government allows the work of the commission until September the 3rd. However, the Morales administration is pretty clear that it gave only 24 hours for the work of the commission to be, done for good. So, how is the exit strategy going to be dealt? What's going to happen with the prosecutor?
The legal exit strategy is that on September 3rd, the mandate of the commission ends, right?
But the message of the...
So there is a legal agreement, and that agreement is in force until September 3rd, 2019. The commissioner and his team will continuously evaluate the best possible way for them to fulfill their obligations under the agreement. And currently, there remains in Guatemala City staff from the commission.
Regardless of the message of the Guatemalan government, only 24 hours.
We heard the message. We'll see. Obviously, there is a deadline of which I think is about 4 o'clock our time. There's an agreement. There's a legal agreement. We are committed to continue to abide by that agreement.
And on Venezuela, also, it's...
Hold on, if you don't mind, let him finish. Go ahead.
My question on Venezuela is on Thursday, Nicolás Maduro will be swearing in again for a new term as president, and already there is a group of nations around the continent, pretty much, who are saying that they will not consider legitimate this new term of Nicolás Maduro as president. So I wonder if the SG is reading this position by different nations that will say that do not see as legitimate this new government, and will he will this change in any level the relationship that Venezuela has with the UN?
We've seen the positions expressed publicly by a number of member states concerning Mr. Maduro's second term. The recognition of a head of state or a head of government is not for the Secretary. It's not for the Secretary General to rule upon. The UN system outside or within Venezuela will continue cooperating with the government and other national actors under the existing development framework assistance framework for Venezuela, particularly in priority areas of health, food, security, and nutrition. Carol.
Stéphane, just to clarify on Guatemala, if the government follows through on its decision to end the commission, would that be a violation then of the legal agreement that they've entered with the UN? And would the Secretary General, for instance, take that to the Security Council?
I'm not going to go into hypothetical. The letter was presented by the Secretary General yesterday from the Foreign Minister of Guatemala, informing us of their intention to terminate the agreement. We rejected the content of that letter. We have been constructively engaged with the government under Article 12 and of the agreement that created SIGIG. And as far as we're concerned, that agreement stands until September 3rd, 2019. The agreement is a public document. We're happy to share it with you, and you can all take a look at it and analyze it as much as you would like.
But if I could just generally then, what would be the consequences for Guatemala for ending the mandate?
Listen, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. I can't speak for Guatemala. What I'm saying is that as far as we're concerned, the work of the Commission will continue until September 3rd, 2019. The Commissioner, as you know, has not been in Guatemala, will continue to evaluate with his team how best to continue that work until September 3rd, 2019. Yes.
Stéphane, back to Yemen. When you talk about obstacles you're facing regarding implementation of the Stockholm Agreement, can you elaborate on that? And then, do you have a general update regarding humanitarian aid in Yemen?
No, I should have had a humanitarian update, but I don't. But I will get one for you. Listen, I'm not going to... Mr. Griffiths is in the thick of it. I think it's all plain for all of us to see the complexity of the situation, of trying to end a conflict that has been going on for so long. Yes, sir.
Yes, Stéphane, on this rigmarole of the Saudi girl who is now detained in Thailand, and her father has now arrived. What is the situation now? And now is she?
I would encourage you to talk to UNHCR, who is in charge of this rigmarole.
But is she still under the protective?
As I said, this is being completely handled by UNHCR. It's their day-to-day job to assess these things. They have an office here. They have a big office in Geneva. Contact them. They'll be happy to tell you what's going on.
So the thing is, will she be safe? Will she be kidnapped?
I don't know what other words to use, Masoud. They are in charge. UNHCR, they've been dealing with it. They've been talking about it publicly. I would encourage you to ask them. And then...
Thank you so much. And it's another one on Yemen and her data. The sticking point at the moment, the complexity that you were talking about before, at this stage seems to be that the agreement referred to a handover of power in Hodeida to local security forces. And the Houthis say this is one bunch of people who are their allies. And the government says it's a different group of people that needs to be returned to. Does the UN take a position on this? Does the UN define who the local security forces should be, who should be taking control of Hodeida?
Those kind of discussions are going on between the RCC, within the RCC, and with Mr. Griffiths. The agreement that was reached in Yemen was critical in the sense that it did create a space for dialogue, which we did not have before Stockholm. We've seen the criticism of some that it should have been more detailed. Of course, every agreement could be better and more detailed. But I think everyone understands the fluidity, the complexity of the situation in Yemen, and especially in Hodeida. And I can assure that Mr. Griffith is trying to bring all of this to a happy ending. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Back to Guatemala. Concerning the members of the commission or the staffers who are still there, what are they doing today? Are they at work, or are they packing up in case they have to leave? And is the UN concerned at all about their safety or security?
There's some there's national staff, there's international staff. Where each of them are, I don't know. I don't know these people personally, so I don't know if they're home or in the offices. But my understanding is that there are some. I'm not going to speculate, but anyway, they're doing what they can do. The government of Guatemala has responsibilities in terms of ensuring the safety of the staff and the protection of the facilities. We expect them to live up to that protection. But we, as always, we're not going to comment on safety procedures that we may be taking to ensure the safety of our colleagues. We'll go to the back and then Stéphane. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering if it is time to say something on Kosovo. No?
It may be time, but I don't have anything new to say. But I will. Maybe tomorrow will be a better time. But I don't mean to make light of the situation. Sorry.
I was asking because Washington Post has an article last week saying that there are quite peace efforts on Kosovo, and maybe will be a peace ceremony in White House. And
I saw those reports, but I have.
UN is not part of this.
Not that I'm aware of.
You are not going to have an invitation to White House peace ceremony.
I think that's all a lot of speculation. I'm not aware that we are involved in any efforts as reported that could be taking place in the Washington Post article. Signore.
Buon anno.
Buon anno. Una domanda, per favore.
Sure. About the ship with migrants, 49 migrants still on the ship is called Sea-Watch, and they've been there now, I think it's 17 days. Does the Secretary General, did they have any contact with European government to try to resolve the situation? There are also children and women in this ship.
We're obviously extremely concerned about the health and the safety of people trying to make that journey, right? And try to make it safely and in dignity. My understanding is that both UNHCR and IOM are in the lead on this, and I think if any contacts were had, they would be having it. But it is important that people's dignity be ensured, and that the lives of these civilians, of children, of men and women, be protected.
And I had handed to my another question that was about Italy in the budget cut it about over $30 million on the contribution to the United Nations. And in September, the
in terms of voluntary contributions?
Huh?
In terms of voluntary contributions?
Not only that. For what I understand, he's 30 million on not only on the voluntary list.
Let me check because I haven't.
But the question is, because in September was announced by Minister Salvini, Deputy Premier, that after a comment on the policy of Italy by the UN and by Bachelet on the policy of that was critical on the policy that Italy had. It was the comment of the minister was that it was going to cut the budget. I mean the money. What is the reaction of the UN, of the Secretary General? Does he see this cut of $32 million as a consequence of certain?
Listen, all the analysis I will leave to you, but let me check on the financial numbers from our Italian friends. Carol, Masood.
Yeah. On this,
it's okay, Masood. Carol yields with pleasure.
Okay, on this recent
and delight
report of Gaza crossing being limited by the Egyptians, do you have any report on that at all?
No, sir. I'll try to get something. Carol.
Stéphane, so today we're asking you about Guatemala ditching the UN Commission, and last week we were asking you about Somalia kicking out the UN envoy. Are these manifestations of the attack on multilateralism that the security?
No, I think they should all be seen as individual. We see individual, unrelated cases.
Yeah, social media is littered with pictures of prisoners in Aden, who claim they are prisoners in UAE jails, and they have been tortured, as they say. Do you have any comment on why the United Arab Emirates can have jails in Yemen?
I don't know that for a fact, but I will look into those reports.
Another question is about Syria. You mentioned Hajin, but you have no presence in Hajin. How did you get the information about Hajin, whereas you had presence in Idlib area in Western Aleppo?
This is information we are getting through trusted sources and through speaking to the people who are coming out.
But how about, the workers, the aid workers in the area of Idlib? You have many workers there, right?
If I have an update on Idlib, I will share it with you. Monica, all yours. And thank you for your patience.